In a corner of the world where time moved slower than honey dripping from a spoon, there lived a hobbit who could see things that weren't quite there yet. Marigold Took had always been different. While other hobbit children chased butterflies through the party field and rolled down the grassy hills of Hobbiton, she would sit perfectly still beneath the party tree, her green eyes fixed on something no one else could see, threads of golden light that wove through the air like spider silk catching the dawn. Her mother said she had her great-great-grandfather's imagination. Her father said she spent too much time alone. But Marigold knew the truth. She could see the magic that held the Shire together, and lately that magic had been fraying. It started small. A flower that bloomed in the morning would be withered by noon. The river that ran clear and cold through the water began to taste of something bitter, something old. The stars, which had always shone with particular brightness over the Shire, seemed to dim one by one, as if someone were snuffing out candles in a distant room. No one else noticed. Or perhaps they noticed but chose not to see, which Marigold had learned was something adults were particularly good at. They went about their days, baking seed cakes, tending gardens, smoking pipeweed on their doorsteps, while the golden threads that connected everything grew thinner and thinner, threatening to snap entirely. On the morning of her 11th birthday, a number that would have been quite significant if she'd been a Baggins, but was merely peculiar for a Took, Marigold woke to find her bedroom filled with silver mist. It curled around her bedpost like living smoke, and within it, she could see shapes moving. A great tree with roots that stretched down into darkness, a door that stood alone in an empty field, and a figure cloaked in starlight who beckoned to her with one pale hand. She should have been frightened. Any sensible hobbit would have pulled the covers over their head and waited for the vision to pass. But Marigold had never been particularly sensible, and the figure in the mist had eyes that reminded her of her grandmother's, kind and knowing and impossibly sad. The vision faded with the morning light, but it left behind a single silver acorn on her windowsill, cold as ice and humming with a sound like distant bells. What would you do if magic left something impossible on your windowsill? Would you touch it, or would you pretend it was never there? Marigold touched it. The moment her fingers closed around the acorn, the world shifted. The walls of her room became transparent, and she could see through them to the bones of the Shire itself, the ancient network of magic that ran beneath every hill and hollow, every garden and gate. And she could see, with terrible clarity, that it was dying. The magic was being drained away, pulled towards something in the east, beyond the borders of the Shire, beyond even the old forest. Something hungry. Something that had been sleeping for a very long time and had recently woken with an appetite for wonder. She knew, in the way you know things in dreams, that she had 3 days. 3 days before the last of the Shire's magic was consumed, before the land became ordinary, before the hobbits forgot that they had ever lived in a place where the impossible was merely improbable. Marigold did what any hobbit would do when faced with an impossible task. She packed a lunch. 2 apples, a wedge of cheese, half a seed cake, and a flask of her father's best cider went into her traveling pack, along with a spare handkerchief, a ball of string, you never knew when string might be useful, and the silver acorn, which she wrapped carefully in a bit of cloth. She left a note on the kitchen table that said simply, "Gone adventuring, back for supper. Love, Marigold." She had no intention of being back for supper, but there was no point in worrying her parents more than necessary. The journey began at the edge of the Shire, where the neat hedgerows gave way to wild country. Marigold had never been beyond the borders before. Few hobbits had, and those who did were generally Tooks, which explained quite a lot about her family's reputation. The golden threads were easier to see here, away from the comfortable clutter of hobbit holes and gardens. They stretched out before her like a road made of light, leading east toward the rising sun. She followed them through meadows where the grass grew tall enough to hide a hobbit, through forests where the trees whispered secrets in languages older than words. The silver acorn grew warmer in her pocket, pulsing like a heartbeat, guiding her when the threads grew too faint to see. On the first night, she made camp beneath an oak tree that was so old it had forgotten it was supposed to be just a tree. Its branches moved without wind, arranging themselves into a shelter above her head, and its roots curved up from the ground to form a natural seat. When she thanked it, because her mother had taught her to always be polite, even to trees, It dropped 3 perfect acorns into her lap, golden and warm and tasting of autumn sunlight. She dreamed that night of the figure in starlight. In her dream, the figure spoke with a voice like wind through leaves. The devourer wakes. It feeds on wonder, on magic, on all the small impossibilities that make a place worth living in. It has already consumed a dozen lands, leaving them gray and empty. The Shire will be next, unless someone remembers how to fight with more than swords. I don't have a sword, Marigold said in the dream. No, the figure agreed. But you have something better. You have a hobbit's heart, and that is a magic all its own. She woke with the taste of starlight on her tongue and the certainty that she was running out of time. The second day brought her to the edge of the old forest, that dark tangle of trees that even the bravest hobbits avoided. The golden threads led directly into its depths, where the shadows were thick enough to touch, and the air smelled of ancient earth and secrets. Marigold stood at the border for a long moment, her toes curling in the grass, every sensible part of her screaming to turn back. But she thought of Hobbiton, of the party tree and the gardens, of her mother's kitchen and her father's laugh, of all the small magics that made the Shire feel like home. She thought of a world where those things became ordinary, where the wonder leaked out like water from a cracked cup. She stepped into the forest. The trees here were old in a way that made the oak from the previous night seem like a sapling. They had faces in their bark, not carved but grown, with eyes that watched her pass and mouths that whispered warnings. The path twisted and turned, leading her deeper into darkness until she could no longer see the sky, and the only light came from the silver acorn, which now glowed like a tiny moon. She walked for hours, or perhaps minutes. Time moved strangely in the old forest, like honey dripping upward. Eventually, she came to a clearing where a single door stood alone, exactly as she had seen in her vision. It was made of dark wood bound with silver, and it had no walls around it, no house to belong to. It simply stood there in the middle of the clearing, waiting. The golden threads all led to this door. They wrapped around it like vines, pulsing with the last of the Shire's magic, being slowly pulled through to whatever lay on the other side. Marigold's hand trembled as she reached for the handle. Would you open a door that stood alone in a haunted forest? Would you step through, knowing you might never come back? She opened it. Beyond the door was not another place but another time. Or perhaps it was the space between times where all moments existed at once. She stood in a vast emptiness filled with stars, and before her crouched the devourer. It was difficult to look at directly. It seemed to be made of absence, of all the things that should have been but weren't. Where it moved, colors faded to gray. Where it breathed, wonder died. It was feeding on the golden threads, pulling them into itself like a spider consuming its web, and with each thread it consumed, it grew larger, more solid, more real. "You cannot stop me, little hobbit," it said, and its voice was the sound of forgotten dreams. "I am hunger itself. I am the end of all magic, the death of all wonder. I have consumed worlds older and greater than your tiny Shire." Marigold should have been terrified. She was terrified. But she was also angry. The kind of anger that only comes from seeing something precious being destroyed. The kind of anger that makes even the smallest creature dangerous. "You're wrong," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "You're not hunger, you're just empty. And I know what fills emptiness." She pulled out the silver acorn. It blazed in her hand like a star, and suddenly she understood. The acorn wasn't a weapon or a tool. It was a seed of pure possibility, of all the magic that could be if someone believed in it strongly enough. The figure in starlight hadn't given her a way to fight the devourer, she'd given her a way to feed something else. Marigold closed her eyes and thought of home. Not just the Shire as it was, but as it could be, as it should be. She thought of every small magic she'd ever witnessed, the way her mother's bread always rose perfectly, the way her father could make anyone laugh, the way the stars seemed to shine just a bit brighter over Hobbiton. She thought of gardens that grew without effort, of rivers that sang, of a place where wonder was as common as breathing. She thought of all this, and she believed in it with every fiber of her being, and she planted the silver acorn in the emptiness between stars. What grew was not a tree, but a world. A vision of the Shire so vivid and real that it made the actual Shire seem like a pale copy. It blazed with golden light, with magic so pure and strong that the devourer recoiled from it, shrieking. The creature tried to consume this new magic, but it couldn't. This wasn't magic that could be taken or destroyed. This was magic that came from belief, from love, from the simple certainty that wonder was worth protecting. The devourer began to shrink. With each moment, it grew smaller and fainter, until it was nothing more than a shadow, and then not even that. It didn't die. Things like the devourer never truly died. But it retreated, back into whatever dark corner of existence it had crawled from, to sleep for another age. The golden threads, freed from the creature's hunger, began to flow back toward the Shire, stronger and brighter than before. The vision of the perfect Shire faded, but it left something behind, a sense of possibility, a reminder that magic wasn't something that could be taken away as long as someone believed in it. Marigold found herself back in the clearing, the door gone, the old forest somehow less frightening in the morning light. The silver acorn in her hand had become an ordinary acorn, brown and simple. But when she looked closely, she could see tiny golden threads running through it like veins of light. She made her way back to the Shire, following the golden threads home. The journey that had taken 2 days took only hours in reverse, as if the land itself was eager to have her back. By the time she reached the borders of Hobbiton, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Everything looked the same, but also different. The colors were brighter, the air sweeter. The flowers in the gardens seemed to glow with inner light, and the stars, just beginning to appear, shone with a brilliance that made her heart ache. The magic had returned stronger than before, woven so deeply into the land that it would take more than a hungry shadow to tear it away. Her parents were waiting at the gate of their hobbit hole, worry etched on their faces. When they saw her, her mother burst into tears and her father swept her into a hug that lifted her feet off the ground. "Where have you been?" her mother demanded. "We've been worried sick." "Adventuring," Marigold said simply. "I left a note." Her father laughed, the sound rich and warm. "That you did, my girl. That you did. But next time you go adventuring, perhaps give us a bit more warning." She promised she would, though they all knew it was a promise she might not keep. Tooks rarely did. That night, as she lay in her bed, Marigold planted the ordinary acorn in a pot on her windowsill. She watered it with water from the river, which tasted clear and cold and perfect once more, and she whispered to it all the things she hoped it would become. In the morning, a tiny green shoot had emerged from the soil, reaching toward the sun. The Shire had been saved, not by a warrior or a wizard, but by a hobbit who understood that the greatest magic of all was simply believing that wonder was worth fighting for. The golden threads continued to weave through the land, invisible to most, but always there, holding everything together with the strength of love and the power of possibility. And Marigold? She grew up to be exactly the kind of hobbit the Shire needed. One who could see the magic in ordinary things, who could remind others that wonder was not something that happened to you, but something you chose to believe in. She never went on another adventure quite like that one, but she didn't need to. She had learned that the greatest adventures were the ones that happened in your own heart, when you decided that the world was worth believing in. Years later, the tree that grew from that ordinary acorn became the tallest in the Shire, its branches reaching toward the stars, its roots running deep into the earth. Children played beneath it, and lovers carved their initials in its bark, and old hobbits sat in its shade and told stories of the days when magic was real. They never knew that magic had never left. It was there in every leaf that fell, in every flower that bloomed, in every laugh that echoed across the party field. It was there because someone had believed in it strongly enough to fight for it, and that belief had become woven into the very fabric of the Shire. The world is full of magic, if you know how to look for it. It's in the small things, the way light falls through leaves, the taste of fresh bread, the sound of someone you love laughing. It's in the belief that wonder is worth protecting, that ordinary places can be extraordinary if we choose to see them that way. If this tale reminded you that magic is real, that even the smallest person can change the world, then perhaps you'll join me for the next story. Subscribe, and let's step into another world together, one where wonder is always just around the corner, waiting to be discovered.